Hey everyone, Mr. Steven here. Welcome to another English lesson. Today's class will be tightly related to the previous lesson because we will continue with the use of the verb to be. So if you happen to miss that class for whatever reason, I encourage you to watch it first and then come back. Before we begin, I would like to give you guys a little heads up and remind you that you can follow our English department on social media. You can find our videos on Instagram and our Facebook page. There is also a group on Facebook in which you can find all of the worksheets that we've been working with. Alright, without any further ado, let's begin today's class. Okay, so if you remember our previous lesson, we talked about how the verb to be works in the present simple and how it's conjugated in three different ways depending on the subject of the sentence. I am, he is, she is, it is, we are, they are, and you are. We also talked about the different structures depending on whether the sentence is affirmative, negative, or if it is a question. So for example, he is a student would be an affirmative sentence and the verb to be comes after the subject. The negative version of this sentence would be he's not a student, in which we simply add not after the verb. Finally, if we want to ask a question, we have to move the verb to be to the beginning of the sentence and add a question mark at the end. Is he a student? Now, it is possible you're wondering, wait a minute, can I combine this? Can I make a negative question? Well, that's an excellent question, and the answer is yes. Sadly, this is where things get confusing, both semantically and grammatically. So pay close attention because it's about to get tricky. First, let's take a look at the grammar. So we already know that in questions, the verb to be must go at the beginning. And in negative sentences, we add not after the verb. Now, do you remember we also talked about contractions in our last class? Well, negative questions also have a contracted form. And this is where things get tricky, because in the not contracted form, the verb to be must go at the beginning and not must go after the subject. For example, is he not a student? However, in the contracted version, not must go at the beginning with the verb to be. For example, isn't he a student? Again, the meaning of both of these sentences is exactly the same. It's just a slight change in the way we form the sentence. And like before, this contracted form is much more common in spoken English. But the not contracted form is still much more formal. Another confusing thing is that in the contracted form, all of the verbs remain the same, except for the first person. Now, even though aren't I isn't really considered grammatically correct, nowadays it's very common in spoken English and it's widely accepted. The reason we use are with I in this particular context is because this contraction doesn't exist. Again, if you're in a formal context, like writing a formal letter, you must use the not contracted version. Now let's practice pronunciation a little bit. I will read the sentences and you repeat after me. Keep in mind you can pause the video if you consider it necessary. Am I not a student? Aren't I a student? Is he not a student? Isn't he a student? Is she not a student? Isn't she a student? Is it not a student? Isn't it a student? Are we not students? Aren't we students? Are they not students? Aren't they students? Are you not students? Aren't you students? Now let's talk about semantics. Semantics basically refers to the meaning of what we say. So what we try to answer here is, why do we use negative questions? First, we need to understand that questions with the verb to be are typically known as yes or no questions because, well, they're usually answered with either yes or no. For example, are you a student? Yes. Are you paying attention? Uh, no. The tricky thing about negative questions is that usually a simple yes or no isn't enough. For example, aren't you a student? Yes. Well, yes, you are a student, or yes, you are not a student. Do you see why this might be confusing? That's why with negative questions, it is always better to give a full answer. Aren't you a student? Yes, I am a student. As simple as that. Okay, but why would anyone use a negative question then? Well, there are a couple of different meanings for these type of questions. You can ask a negative question when something seems surprising. For example, imagine you're having dinner with some friends and you see that one of them is not eating. So you ask them, why aren't you eating? Aren't you hungry? So you're surprised, because the normal thing at that moment would be for everybody to eat, right? They can also be used when you're asking for confirmation, like when you meet someone for the first time and their face looks familiar. So you ask, hey, aren't you John's sister? You're pretty sure that she is, but you just want confirmation about it. Let's see some examples.
Aren't you the guy who tried to hurt me with the word goodbye?
So what do you think is the use of this negative question in this example? Is Dua Lipa surprised or asking for confirmation? In this case, Dua Lipa is asking for confirmation. Of course, this is a type of rhetorical question because she already knows the answer. Next example.
Why aren't you scared of me? Why do you care for me? When we all fall asleep, where do we go?
In this case, is Billie Eilish surprised or does she want to confirm something? Here we have three different questions, although only the first one is negative. In this case, Billie Eilish is surprised because she assumes that most people are scared of her. Let's see one final example.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
In this case, what is the intention of the negative question? In this example, Maximus is also asking for confirmation. Notice that, unlike the first two examples, here we see the not contracted form, are you not, instead of aren't you. Alright, that's a lot of information about negative questions. Let's see a summary of everything we've learned today. We've learned that negative questions can have a different word order depending on whether we use contractions or not. We learned about the oddity of using the verb are with the pronoun I, at least in spoken English. And we also learned that negative questions can express surprise, or they can be used when you're trying to confirm something. Okay, time to practice. Here we have 5 exercises in which you have to change the sentences accordingly. For example, sentence number 1 is affirmative, and we need to change it into a question. So what do we need to do to make a question? That's right, we have to move the verb to be to the beginning and add a question mark at the end. So, Maria is tired becomes is Maria tired? So keep in mind, you may have to add not to a sentence, remove not from a sentence, or change the order of the words. It all depends on what the exercise tells you to do. As always, I encourage you to try the rest of the exercises by yourself first, and then continue watching to check your answers. Okay, sentence number 2 is a question, and we need to change it into a negative sentence. So in this case, we need to change the order of the words and add not. The kids are not outside. Remember that we also remove the question mark at the end, because the sentence is no longer a question. Repeat. The kids are not outside. Sentence number 3 is affirmative, and we need to change it into a question. So once again, we change the order of the words and we add the question mark at the end. Are John and Peter very good friends? Repeat. Are John and Peter very good friends? Next sentence is negative, and we need to change it into affirmative. So we must simply remove not. Carlos is a doctor. Repeat. Carlos is a doctor. Last sentence is again negative, and we need to change it into affirmative. So we remove not, and we get I am happy. Let's turn those frowns upside down, alright? And that is all for today. Next class we will begin by taking a look at the present simple, with the rest of the verbs. I really hope you guys are enjoying these lessons, or at the very least finding them useful. Again, don't forget to check out our department on social media. And in the meantime, why don't you take a look at some other class in this channel? Maybe it's time to learn some math or watch an art lesson. We have over 50 classes for all levels. Remember not to leave your house unless it is absolutely necessary. These are complicated times for everybody, I know, but we got to play by the rules if we want to beat this pandemic. This has been Mr. Esteban wishing you a happy week. Stay safe.